Some things in your home aren't just collecting dust, they're quietly pushing people away. You might not even notice it. It starts small, a shelf you never touch, a room that feels frozen in time, a silence that stretches too long. But over the years, these quiet signs add up, and before you know it, you're sitting in a perfectly preserved space that no one visits, wondering why you feel so alone. What if I told you the way your home feels could be silently shaping your relationships? The objects we hold on to, out of love, habit, or fear of letting go, can sometimes send the wrong message, not just to guests, but to ourselves. They whisper stories of who we used to be, but they don't leave room for who we are now, or who we're still becoming. You deserve more than memories and muffled echoes. You deserve laughter, connection, surprise visits, shared meals, and conversations that don't feel like they're interrupting something. Welcome to Wise Aging Seniors. I'm Henry. Around here, we don't just talk about growing older, we talk about growing better. If you're ready for a gentle but honest look at what might be keeping you isolated, hit that like button and subscribe. What you hear today could be the first step toward a warmer, more connected life, starting with 5 surprising things that may be doing more harm than you think. Thelonious Grigg was the kind of man who believed in keeping things just the way they were. At 78, he lived in the same creaky house where he'd once read bedtime stories to his children, danced in the kitchen with his late wife Madeleine, and sipped chamomile tea while listening to jazz records on Sunday evenings. A retired librarian, his life was cataloged, neatly arranged in boxes, shelves, and carefully labeled photo albums. Every room told a story. But here's the catch. None of those stories had a new chapter in years. Thelonious wasn't sad, at least not on the surface. He had his routines. His morning paper, his afternoon puzzle, his evening cup of tea with the television humming in the background. But the house had grown too quiet. Calls became fewer, visits shorter. And he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Until one Saturday afternoon, his niece Clara stopped by unannounced. She hadn't visited in over a year. As she walked through the front door, her eyes darted from the old lace curtains to the untouched wedding china, to the still shining trophy from her cousin's high school baseball days. He was now 45. She turned slowly to Thelonious and said, not unkindly, but firmly, "Uncle Theo, your house feels like a museum no one wants to visit." That sentence didn't just land, it echoed. At first, he was offended. A museum? He had preserved memories, kept things clean, cherished what mattered. But later that night, he sat in his recliner, looked around, and saw what Clara saw, rooms so carefully protected that life no longer happened in them. There was no space for spontaneity, no signs of new stories, no fingerprints from visiting hands, just a gallery of frozen moments. That conversation became the beginning of something bigger, a reckoning, not with grief or aging, but with the unspoken way our environments reflect our willingness to keep living. Thelonious realized he hadn't just preserved objects, he'd preserved time. And in doing so, he unintentionally created a place where no one felt welcome to add to the story. It's not about throwing away everything you love. It's about asking, am I living in the past because I want to, or because I'm afraid to move forward? Ever had someone point out something in your home that made you suddenly see it differently? Maybe a friend asked why you still have those unopened gift boxes. Maybe your child wondered why the guest room still feels like grandma's untouched shrine. Share your story in the comments. We're listening. Item 1. The Memorial Zone. The first item on this list is one of the most sacred and one of the most dangerous. The Memorial Zone. It often starts with the best intentions. A shelf with your wedding photo. A small corner where your late spouse's favorite books still sit. Maybe a drawer full of old cards, dried corsages, love letters, or the last birthday note your child gave you before moving to another state. These are real, powerful pieces of your history. And of course, they matter. They're part of who you are. But over time, what begins as a tribute can quietly become a trap. In Thelonious Grigg's home, There was a corner in the hallway he hadn't touched in over a decade. It held Madeline's scarf, the porcelain mug she used for tea, and a half-used bottle of her lavender perfume. He'd walk by it every day, but never dared to move a thing. That corner was frozen in time, and without meaning to, it cast a shadow over the rest of the house. Every guest noticed it, and no one knew what to say. The space became sacred, but not in a way that invited love. It became a boundary, a place you tiptoe around. Memorial zones like this may bring comfort, but they can also anchor you to pain. Not in a loud or obvious way, but in silence. They say, this chapter is still open. And sometimes, that unspoken message is what keeps others from writing new chapters with you. Your home should be a reflection of who you are now, not just who you were. That doesn't mean erasing the people you've loved or the moments you've cherished. It means transforming the way you hold those memories. Instead of a closed shrine, what if you created a living memory wall with photos and recent snapshots? A rotating shelf of keepsakes that evolves with the seasons of your life? Because here's the truth. When every room whispers what once was, it's hard for anyone to feel like they're part of what is. And that includes you. We've all held on to something that felt too important to let go of. But sometimes letting go isn't about forgetting. It's about making room for something new to come in. Maybe it's as small as moving that untouched display into a memory box, or combining the old photo of your anniversary with one of your most recent birthday, surrounded by friends you didn't know 10 years ago. As the saying goes, a home should honor the past, but never close the door to the present. So take a walk through your space today. Is there a spot in your home that feels more like a museum than a memory? Does it bring you peace, or prevent it? And stay with me, because the next item is something most of us live with every day. It's not tucked in a corner. It's front and center, and even more isolating. Item 2. The Eternal TV Companion. There's something oddly comforting about the gentle hum of a television in the background. It fills the silence. It keeps you company. It even gives the illusion that someone's in the room with you. But here's the difficult truth. When the TV becomes your constant companion, not for enjoyment, but just to avoid silence, it starts to do more harm than good. Thelonious Grigg didn't used to watch much television. But after Madeline passed, and after the kids moved on, the TV slowly became the one thing that was always there. Morning news, afternoon game shows, evening dramas, and late-night reruns. He wasn't really watching most of the time. It was just on, like wallpaper, like a safety net. And he's not alone. Many older adults use the television to fill the void that once held conversations, footsteps, laughter, or the simple sound of someone else making tea in the kitchen. The problem isn't the TV itself. It's what it replaces. When Clara visited, she noticed that every conversation had to compete with the noise. She had to raise her voice just to ask Thelonious how he was doing. When she tried to turn the volume down, he flinched, almost like she was turning off a friend. That's when she realized the TV wasn't entertainment anymore. It was a barrier, a protective shield against loneliness, but also against connection. Visitors often feel like they're intruding when the TV is always on. They assume they're a background feature, not the main event. And over time, they stop visiting altogether, not out of unkindness, but because it doesn't feel like they're wanted. The room already feels full, even when it isn't. But imagine this. What if your living room felt more like a cafe than a waiting room? What if, instead of voices coming from a screen, they were coming from friends, grandchildren, neighbors? That starts with turning the TV off, even just for part of the day, and letting silence make space for something real. Start small. Choose 1 hour a day, maybe lunchtime, where the television goes off. Instead, read a short story, call someone, sit on the porch, or even just let the quiet be. At first, it might feel uncomfortable. That's normal. But soon, that silence will stop feeling like emptiness and start feeling like possibility. Ask yourself honestly, when was the last time the room was quiet enough to hear your own thoughts? Or someone else's? Have you ever gone an entire day without turning the TV on? What changed? Share your experience in the comments. Your insight might inspire someone else to try. And stay tuned. because the next item may be hiding in plain sight. It looks pristine, perfect, and well kept, but it quietly sends a message that can drive people away. Item 3. The untouchable furniture. We've all seen it. The perfectly preserved chair no one's allowed to sit in. The guest bed with the decorative pillows that never get used. The plastic covers still clinging to the dining chairs, as if someone might spill a glass of red wine at any moment. Even though no one's had dinner there in years. These spaces don't invite comfort. They deliver a quiet message. Don't sit. Don't stay. For Thelonious Grigg, this message lived in the form of a seafoam green couch. It was elegant, embroidered, and positioned like a throne in his front sitting room. Madeline had bought it just before her illness, saying, "We'll have people over for tea again." But no one ever sat on it. Not once. For 30 years, it remained untouched, still wrapped in the original protective film beneath the throw blanket. Clara used to call it the forbidden sofa. At first, it was funny. Then it wasn't. Because when something is too precious to touch, it becomes untouchable in every sense. Not just physically, but emotionally. A living room should live. A couch should slump a little from laughter. Pillows should be tossed around by grandkids. Tables should have a few coffee rings. That's how a home breathes. When visitors walk into a room that feels like a display, where everything is just so, where you can't sit back without worrying about wrinkling a cover or scuffing a floor, they don't relax. They don't open up. And over time, they don't come back. Thelonious didn't realize it at first. To him, he was keeping things nice for the day someone might visit. But by keeping everything pristine, he accidentally made people feel like they didn't belong, that they might mess something up, that they were a disturbance, not a guest. Ask yourself, is your home filled with comfort or control? Have you created an environment that invites people to live, or one that showcases how well you've preserved what used to be? Here's a gentle suggestion. Take off the plastic. Uncover the couch. Let your furniture do what it was meant to do. Hold bodies, conversations, and yes, maybe even a coffee stain or two. Because that just-for-show space could become the most loved room in the house, if you let it. Clara finally did sit on that old seafoam couch. One rainy afternoon, she and Thelonious talked about her childhood, Madeline's homemade soup, and the sound of jazz on Sunday nights. By the end of that conversation, the cushions had finally softened, and so had he. It wasn't about the couch. It was about making space for connection, for imperfection, for life. Now, take a look around your home. Is there a chair no one sat in since the 90s? A guest room that's never had an overnight guest? Maybe it's time to claim those spaces again, not just as rooms, but as invitations. Because comfort shouldn't be preserved. It should be shared. And while this item is about what we protect on the outside, the next one reveals something far more personal. The dreams we've tucked away, and what they say about how we see ourselves today. Item 4. The someday projects. Every home has them. Those quiet corners holding forgotten promises. A box of watercolor paints never opened. A guitar leaning against the wall, slightly out of tune. The model train set with half a track and no station. A stack of untouched puzzles waiting for a rainy day that never quite came. These aren't just objects. They're echoes of who we once hoped to be. In Thelonious Grigg's study, there was a cabinet he hadn't opened in years. Inside, a pristine calligraphy set, a thick sketchbook with 2 pages filled, and a booklet titled "Learn Italian in 12 Weeks." He bought it the year after retirement, convinced he and Madeline would travel to Florence someday. The trip never happened, and the items slowly faded into the background. Not thrown away, but never touched again. At first glance, these items seem harmless. A hobby postponed, a craft you'll get to eventually. But over time, they transform. From tools of creativity into symbols of delay. They stop inspiring and start haunting. Every time you pass them, you feel that tiny sting of guilt. I should really try that again. And others notice too, even if they never say it out loud. When someone walks into a space filled with abandoned projects, what they see is a story that never moved forward, a room stuck in pause. It gives the impression, not intentionally, that life has slowed to a crawl, that curiosity has faded, that joy has been placed on hold indefinitely. But what if it didn't have to be that way? You don't need to finish the novel or paint a masterpiece. You just need to start again. One page, one puzzle piece, one off-key strum. Not for perfection, but for presence. For proof that you still say yes to new things. That there's more ahead than just behind. Dusting off a forgotten project is one of the quietest acts of courage. It's telling yourself, it's not too late to begin again. And if a project no longer brings joy, let it go without shame. Not everything unfinished is a failure. Sometimes, letting go clears space for something that fits who you are now, not who you once thought you'd be. When Clara gently asked Thelonious why he kept those untouched items in the cabinet, he laughed. "I guess I was waiting for the right moment," he said. She smiled and handed him the sketchbook. "Then let's make it now." They sat at the table that afternoon. He didn't sketch anything grand, just the mug in front of him. But the lines were shaky, real, alive. For the first time in years, the tools were back in his hands. What have you been putting off for years? Something you once loved or hoped to try? Tell us in the comments. Sometimes, sharing it out loud is the first step to dusting it off. And what comes next is the hardest item of all. It's not something you see on a shelf or tucked away in a drawer. It lives deeper, and its impact is felt long before anyone steps through the front door. Item 5. The coat by the door. It was always there, hanging quietly on the old wooden peg by the door. A soft blue raincoat, slightly faded at the shoulders, with a frayed cuff and a scent that had somehow lingered through the years. It was Madeline's, and even though she'd been gone for over a decade, Thelonious Grigg had never taken it down. He told himself it was practical, that it didn't bother anyone, that it was just there. But in truth, that coat meant everything. It was the last thing she wore before their final trip to the grocery store. The coat that held a note in the pocket, a recipe she'd meant to try but never did. The one he once wrapped around her shoulders on a windy autumn walk. And so it stayed. But here's the quiet truth about items like this. They don't just hold memories. They hold space. Space that no one else feels welcome to fill. A coat left hanging, untouched, becomes more than fabric. It becomes a signal. A message, subtle, unspoken, that says someone else lived here. This house belongs to them. Even if that someone is no longer there. Clara noticed it on her second visit. She paused near the doorway, eyes drifting toward the raincoat. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The room shifted. The conversation cooled. Thelonious felt it, not in anger, but in absence. Because the coat didn't make people feel closer to Madeline. It made them feel like they were intruding on something sacred, like they could never quite belong. And that's the danger. When we preserve a place too tightly for someone who's gone, we unintentionally keep the living at arm's length. Now, let's be clear, grief deserves space. Memories matter, and no one should feel rushed to move on from someone they love. But there's a difference between remembering and freezing a home in time. Thelonious didn't need to throw the coat away. He didn't even need to forget. What he needed was permission to fold it gently, place it in a box, and say, "Thank you for everything." Because letting go isn't erasing. It's making space. For guests, for family, for joy to wander back in, unannounced. Eventually, he did it. On a quiet Tuesday morning, after making coffee and watching the light fall across the hallway, he reached up and took it down. Slowly, carefully, he pressed the fabric to his chest and whispered, "You'll always be here, but I need to be here too." That small act, it changed everything. He cleared that space by the door, replaced it with a small table and a fresh vase of flowers. The next time Clara came over, she smiled without needing to say a word. The room felt lighter. So did he. Do you have something in your home that belongs to someone who's gone? Something you've kept right where they left it? You're not alone. Share your story in the comments. It may help someone else realize they're ready too. Because sometimes the heaviest things we carry are the ones still hanging by the door. And now, Thelonious's journey is nearly complete. But before we close, let's bring it all together. The truth about these items, and the freedom that comes when we release what quietly keeps us stuck. The turning point. There was no trumpet sound, no big moment, no dramatic scene with tears or music swelling in the background. Just a quiet morning, sunlight breaking through the curtains, and a man standing by the door, looking at a blue raincoat. That's when Thelonious Grigg, 78 years old and stubborn in his ways, decided something had to change. He didn't say anything. He didn't make a speech. He just took it down, the coat that had hung there like a monument to the past. The silence in the hallway felt different after that. Not empty, open. Then he turned off the television. The constant background hum that had followed him from breakfast to bedtime, that once filled the quiet, suddenly wasn't there. At first, the silence was unnerving. But after a few moments, he heard something he hadn't in years. Birdsong outside his window. The rustle of the breeze. His own breath. Then came the plastic. Thelonious had always joked that his living room looked like a crime scene waiting for evidence. The couch had been wrapped for decades, reserved for, well, no one. So, with a tug, the covers came off. The cushions sighed. He sat down and realized, for the first time, that the fabric was actually quite soft. Something shifted. He called his neighbor, Mr. Harrow, a retired postman he hadn't spoken to beyond polite nods. Invited him over for tea. Then he texted Clara, "Think I'm ready for visitors. Bring cookies." That afternoon, the house didn't look like a showroom. It looked like a home. Thelonious had cleared off the dining table, set out mismatched mugs, even found an old jazz record he and Madeline used to love. He let it play while voices filled the room. Real voices. Not the ones from reruns or memories. He laughed, out loud. He hadn't done that in months. And something incredible happened. The memories didn't disappear. They became softer, more gentle, less heavy. Madeline was still everywhere, but now she was part of the moment, not the weight on top of it. Because that's the truth no one tells you. When you make space in your home, you make space in your life. The ghosts don't leave, but they step aside and let the living in. Thelonious started small. He didn't redecorate the whole house. He just cleared the coat, turned off the noise, opened a few doors, literal and emotional. And loneliness, that old companion, it didn't shout as it left. It just stopped showing up. Here's the takeaway. When we let go of the weight of yesterday, not the memory, but the holding on, today starts to breathe again. There's room for laughter, conversation, music, and even new traditions. Not as replacements, but as companions to the old ones. You don't have to change everything overnight. But maybe you start with one thing. One small, symbolic gesture. A drawer, a shelf, a coat. What would your turning point look like? Tell us below. It could be the first step towards something beautiful. Because home isn't where the past lives untouched. It's where life keeps knocking, and someone finally opens the door. Which of these 5 home holdovers struck a chord with you the most? Was it the corner of preserved memories, the ever-blaring television, the untouched furniture, those someday projects, or the coat that never came down? Drop your answer in the comments and tell us why. It might inspire someone else to see their own space in a new light. If you believe real connection can start at any age, tap that like button now. Share this video with a friend or family member who may be clinging to more than just keepsakes, and remind them it's never too late to open the door to fresh starts. And before you go, make sure you're part of our community. Subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors. We've got more heartfelt, no-nonsense insights coming your way, because growing wiser means sharing honest truths together.